Good morning and welcome to Rising. We've got another great show for you today as the week continues. We're halfway through it,
It's
I
hump
think.
day.
How about that?
Things are going well.
Great. Nice to see you, Linda.
Nice to see you too, Robby. What's on your radar?
Happy to tell you. Let's get right to it. So, viewers, do you remember a woman named Deborah Birx, the lady with the colorful scarves who appeared at all those early press conferences during COVID-19? Birx was, along with Dr. Anthony Fauci, one of the main advisors to President Donald Trump and then, of course, President Joe Biden on all matters involving COVID. She was one of the foremost public health authorities crafting the government's response to the pandemic, including social distancing, masking requirements, and the promotion of vaccines. Now, I have long criticized Fauci and Birx for being all too ready to jettison civil liberties and ignore legitimate disagreement among experts about the right way to combat COVID. Some experts, for instance, initially downplayed immunity acquired from infection in their haste to promote mass vaccination for all persons regardless of their individual health statuses. Fauci subsequently admitted that he made up the guidance on 6 feet of social distancing, and other policies like mask mandates and vaccine mandates are now routinely questioned, as they should be, as having not actually done very much to fight COVID. Now, while the vaccines did a good job of reducing severe illness and death for the most at-risk population, the elderly, the obese, and the immunocompromised, they did not end up offering broad protection against infection. But that's how they were sold to the public. Joe Biden declared COVID to be a pandemic of the unvaccinated and explicitly said we wouldn't have cases of COVID if the vaccine hesitant would just stop clinging to misinformation and get the jab. He was wrong, as were other government health advocates. You can get as many COVID jabs as you want, because we all know it's not going to stop you from contracting COVID. So I was fascinated to hear Deborah Birx finally admit, at long last, exactly this. Here she was on Piers Morgan's show recently.
And what we've done wrong in public health is we didn't explain that COVID vaccines were nothing like the childhood vaccines, and that the childhood vaccines, like many of the diseases, you get it once, you don't get it again. And this is getting the children to have that disease without getting the deadly consequences. That is not what the COVID vaccine was designed to do. It wasn't designed to prevent against infection. And if you look at the vaccine hesitancy rates, they've doubled since COVID. So we have to start addressing these things. We can't just ignore them.
And Deborah, let me ask you, Deborah, I mean, given that you were the face of COVID from the Trump presidency at the time, do you share, this doctor who I was with, do you share the concerns about the longer term negative impact of some of the COVID vaccines?
The messenger RNA vaccine should have been rolled out for the people that were at risk for severe disease, because that's what the vaccine was developed for.
And here's a little bit more of that interview. Keep watching.
But when we say that we're following the science and the data, we need to follow the science and the data. And the science and the data said people primarily over 65 or people with significant comorbidities were at risk for severe disease. Those are the individuals that should have been immunized first. And we should have put our science behind our immunization schedule and protected those most at risk. It went into young people in hospitals before it went into our elderly in nursing homes. That is not following the science and the data. So I am all for following the science and the data, but it shouldn't just be a statement. It should be a reality.
Excuse me while I pick my jaw up off the floor. This is incredible, truly incredible. Now even Deborah Birx, who along with Fauci was the highest profile purveyor of the mainstream elite consensus on COVID, she now thinks that our government, the government she was in charge of advising at the most foundational level, did not follow the science in terms of the vaccine rollout. This admission forces us to imagine a world in which the government listened to the Deborah Birx of 2025 versus the Deborah Birx of 2020. Maybe then the government would have worked to swiftly deploy vaccines to the elderly and the immunocompromised, while acknowledging that young people and those who had already contracted the disease were not at significant risk and could return to life, work, and school without issue. Instead, the health bureaucracy pursued an implicit zero COVID strategy, toiling under the false, utterly false notion that vaccinating everyone would reduce COVID cases to next to nothing. If you questioned or objected to that plan, You were deemed a heretic. You were deemed anti-vax. So this is remarkable to listen to. So I agree with everything she's saying in this interview, but she's describing, the public health authorities or the government advisors as if that was
not her.
Right, as if that was some different category of people. It's literally her. It was her and Fauci.
Right.
So I guess she didn't quite admit she was wrong. She just kind of put it on someone else. But it was exactly as she's saying now, that the vaccines were sold to people as a prophylactic measure to stop you from getting COVID. Remember breakthrough cases? Where, we're just going to see a handful of breakthrough cases, and then everybody gets a breakthrough case, and then literally everyone is still going to get COVID, no matter if you've been vaccinated or not. Now, I'm not against the vaccines. I got vaccinated. I got boosted. I think the harms or the risks of the vaccines have been overstated by people who oppose them, but so too have the benefits been stated by these very people in terms of preventing the disease itself and the spread of the disease. And that's how they were sold. Everybody has to get this vaccine in order to stop the spread of the virus. That didn't work, and now she's saying the vaccine wasn't designed in the first place to do that, so they ought to have known that wasn't going to work. Where are we? Tell me where I'm wrong.
Well, I'm not going to say you're wrong, Robby. I'm stunned myself at the way that she described what they knew, when they knew, and also where she is today in terms of her opinion. It may just be that I was juggling 3 kids and it just felt like the world was the most terrifying place. But what I feel like I remember was interpreting the vaccine more like the flu vaccine, that it was going to minimize the impacts if you got it. I don't believe I ever thought that if I got the shot that I wasn't going to get COVID.
Well, you're smarter than me then, because I thought, because I was listening to people in charge, maybe not, like Joe Biden. Joe Biden did say it's a pandemic of the unvaccinated. If more people would get vaccinated, we wouldn't have all these cases. I remember on this program, I don't think it was a day that I was hosting, but my former co-host Kim Iverson got into a scuffle with someone. Again, I was not hosting that day. Someone else on the program who was saying, well, yeah, we need everybody to get vaccinated so that we can reduce the cases. And she said what you said just now. Well, but the flu vaccine doesn't work that way. You still have cases of the flu.
Exactly.
You have people get less sick, and that's why people get it. But it doesn't eliminate the flu. And Kim ended up being totally right, completely right. And she was, described as crazy at the time.
Yeah, all I remember is that it was a very, very scary period of time. It was funny, we were just talking about this morning, a colleague and I, and how we were in the lockdowns. People just weren't sure exactly what happened. If you remember back early on, they said, hey, if we just lock down the country for 3 weeks, maybe that would keep it from spreading.
Yes, and then it was
a lot of confusion.
The shifting goalposts got so obnoxious. I understood we were going to lock down in order to prepare our health system to deal with an onslaught of very sick people. That was how it was sold to us, and okay, I think that makes sense. But then it was, no, now we're going to everything is going to be shut down until the vaccines are available, too.
Right.
Okay. Then it was, the vaccines are available. Now it's going to be, everything's going to stay shut down until everybody's had the opportunity to even get the vaccine. Okay. Then it was, now everything's going to remain shut down until, cases drop to almost nothing, and schools are just going to remain closed until there's no COVID in schools whatsoever. I'm like, well, that's never going to happen. That won't happen at any point in the next century, as far as we can tell. So the shifting goalposts, I think, were really a mistake on the public health experts on their part, because I think it eroded a lot of faith in them.
In the healthcare system writ large.
Yes.
I don't want to discount how terrifying
and
it
people
was.
were afraid,
and,
yes.
And of course, we all remember those really awful selfie videos that first responders were posting about how exhausted they were and how helpless they felt in the face of all of it. I don't know how much of what was being expressed by the then first Trump administration that was really just intended to tamp down people's anxieties.
All right, next up on Rising, President Donald Trump and Elon Musk were interviewed by Fox News host Sean Hannity. We will watch and discuss. Stay tuned. President Donald Trump and tech mogul Elon Musk sat down with Fox News host Sean Hannity recently.
The full interview aired last night. The three discussed various topics from inflation to DOGE and Musk's support for Trump.
Here's Trump on inflation.
Inflation is back. I'm only here for 2.5 weeks.
That was January.
Inflation is back. No, think of it. Inflation's back, and they said, "Oh, Trump inflation." I had nothing to do with it. These people have run the country. They spent money like nobody's ever spent. They were given $9 trillion to throw out the window. $9 trillion, And they spent it on the Green News scam, I call it. It's the greatest scam in the history of the country. One of them. We have a lot of them, I guess, but one of them.
The two also touched on conflict of interest concerns surrounding Musk's ventures and his work with the administration.
He thinks he has a better product,
Yeah.
and as long as he has a level playing field, he doesn't care what you do, which
Exactly.
is very, he's told me that.
Yeah. I mean, I haven't asked the president for anything ever.
And if
true.
it comes up, how will you handle it?
Well,
He won't be involved.
yeah, I'll recuse myself if it is.
If there's a
conflict.
conflict, he won't be involved.
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't want that, and he won't want it.
Right, and obviously I'm getting a sort of a daily proctology exam here. You know, it's not like I'll be getting away from something in the dead of night. you know?
Welcome to D.C. If you want a friend, get a dog.
The two also discussed criticism they face from Democrats and the media.
The president is the elected representative of the people, so he's representing the will of the people. And if the bureaucracy is fighting the will of the people and preventing the president from implementing what the people want, then what we live in is a bureaucracy and not a democracy.
Now I see they want you two to start, they want a divorce. They want you two to start hating each other. And they try, President Elon Musk, for example. You do know that they're doing that to you.
Elon called me. He said, you know, they're trying to drive us apart. I said, absolutely. No, they said, we have breaking news. Donald Trump has ceded control of the presidency to Elon Musk. President Musk will be attending a cabinet meeting tonight at 8 o'clock. And I say, It's just so obvious. They're so bad at it. I used to think they were good at it. They're actually bad at it, because if they were good at it, I'd never be president.
Like, I was at a friend's birthday party in LA, just a birthday dinner, and it was like a nice, quiet dinner, and everyone was behaving normally. And I happened to mention, this is before the election, like a month or two before, I happened to mention the president's name. And it was like they got shot with a dart in the jugular that contained like methamphetamine and rabies, okay? And they're like, wow! And I'm like, what is wrong? Like, guys, like, you can't have like a normal conversation.
And last but not least, they touched on the goals of DOGE.
Well, the overall goal is to try to get $1 trillion out of the deficit. And if the deficit is not brought under control, America will go bankrupt. This is a very important thing for people to understand. A country is no different from an individual in that if an individual overspends, an individual can go bankrupt, and so can a country.
Turning Point USA founder Charlie Kirk wrote in part on X, what the world saw tonight between President Trump and Elon Musk is that the world's most powerful man and the world's richest man are actual friends. This is what the left and the haters will never properly account for. I've tried to explain it to people for years. President Trump is a good man who loves America and has genuine friendships that create more power and momentum for positive change than any pundit will ever be able to commentate on or calculate. All patriotic Americans should wish them both Godspeed and much success.
Meanwhile, Substacker Wajahat Ali wrote on Blue Sky, why is Musk, who has no official role, sitting down and doing interviews with Trump in the White House?
This was a fascinating interview. The Trump-Elon relationship is a strong one. I think it throws a lot of people, or especially a lot of liberals, because Trump has never really shared the spotlight before. He has unpersoned or gotten rid of people who aspire to his level of celebrity. Obviously, there was a lot of personnel changes in his first White House as people kind of jockeyed for positions and power, etc. And yet now it's only been, I guess, a month. So who
Hard
knows?
to believe.
Who knows where this will end up? But in Elon, Trump has found someone he clearly likes and respects and enjoys the company of and listens to. This is a very powerful alliance that could reshape our entire country, is reshaping our entire government, our relationship with other countries. And it seems to be an enduring one. Trump is not taking the bait on the media trying to say, oh, Elon's actually the president, make him feel jealous, get rid of Elon. That's that's clearly not going to work. On the Elon side, Elon is happy to acknowledge that Trump is the president. I'm just making suggestions. He makes the final call, etc. It is a dynamic that is working.
It is certainly a dynamic that none of us would have predicted a year ago, even several months ago. So it is fascinating to watch. what I will say is, I think that so-called interview, because I think they were all softballs, right? It was really just...
That was a friendly
It's a friendly conversation
Sure.
among three friends, I think is pretty clear.
Yeah, well, three people who agree, broadly.
Exactly. But it was really not designed to break any news, right? It was just performative. It was designed to show that these guys have a good relationship and to drive home exactly the message that you're describing there, Robby, is that they have a strong relationship. The things that people are lobbing at them is not going to have an impact. Now, that's what they set out to do last night.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's genuine, though. I mean, maybe I'm a fool for believing it, but I think they genuinely like each other, agree on how they're doing. I don't think it's like just for the cameras or something.
Well,
I think they spend a lot of time together, and they think that's a successful strategy.
I think they're clearly happy with each other at the moment.
And what did Elon say? He loves Donald Trump as much as any one straight man can love another.
Well, that's a very interesting comment from the guy who we were just talking about, is potentially got a 13th kid. Look, I think here's the thing. The good news is last night did what they wanted it to do. It jived up all of their base and got the other side more annoyed than ever. The bad news is both of them actually have a very long track record of having, quote unquote, really strong relationships with people either in their professional lives or their private lives, and then all of that falling out. I mean, famously so for both of them.
Yeah.
So all that is to say, as you point out, Robby, it's been a month. We'll see where they are in a year.
I tweeted late last night after having an entire bottle of wine, so maybe this wasn't the best tweet ever, but their relationship is beginning to remind me of, do you watch, I'm still trying to figure out what your thing is. Do you watch Game of Thrones? Did you watch any Game of Thrones?
Did I watch Game of Thrones? Probably 100 times.
Oh, you're a Game of Thrones person. Great. They're starting to give me Cersei and Qyburn vibes. That's her advisor, the
of course.
necromancer guy. Because their relation, on paper, these are two people who don't seem like they would hang out. Cersei doesn't get along with anyone because she's, so self-centered and makes all these chaotic decisions. But then she finds someone who gets her and just wants to do his crazy scientific experiments and is there for her and defends and supports her and actually builds her into the very powerful leader she always wanted to be, consolidates in the later seasons total control over Westeros with Qyburn at her side. That's the vibe I'm getting from these days. You're terrified. You're like, oh God, I didn't think of it that way.
No, I see where you're going with this. I will say this. So Qyburn had something to gain from it, his own power, his own dynamic.
Well, he wanted to do his scientific experimentation
exactly
for the
freely.
good of all humanity and his benefit.
Maybe so.
See, there's an Elon thing there. Obviously, it's good for Elon's companies, but he wants to get us to Mars and do scientific experimentation.
At any cost.
Well,
harming anybody that was in their path. And in the very end, now we're going too far down this Game of Thrones rabbit hole, but in the end, she ran away from him and let him be crumbled on his own.
Yeah, it didn't turn out well for that. Well, we just pretend the last season didn't happen because it was so bad, and I don't recognize it.
We're on the same page.
In my headcanon, Daenerys is still sailing to Westeros, and none of the last two seasons has taken place yet. All right, coming up on Rising, how is Trump doing at the border? What's going on between Alexandria Ocasio Cortez and Tom Homan? We'll discuss. Stay with us. One of President Donald Trump's biggest campaign promises was to end the border crisis.
Trump vowed to dramatically slow down the number of illegal crossings and to carry out the largest deportation operation in U.S. history.
On that first front, things are looking good for Trump. Per ABC News, CBP data shows Border Patrol apprehensions for the period between January 21st through the 31st, they dropped 85% compared to the same window last year. There's also been a 93% drop in migrant apprehensions at ports of entry in the 11 days following January 20th.
On the deportation side, however, things don't seem to be going the way the Trump administration wants them to. ICE's daily arrest numbers seem to be dropping. On January 26th, the number reached up to 1,179 arrests. According to DHS data obtained by the Washington Post, in late January, however, there were about 800 arrests per day. For the first 13 days of February, they dropped to less than 600. Now the Trump administration has stopped releasing daily numbers and instead will do so monthly. The Trump administration had given ICE a quota of around 1,200 to 1,500 a day.
Then there's the beef between border czar Tom Homan and New York Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. It all started when Cortez uploaded a webinar to her Facebook page that teaches migrants what their rights are to help them avoid deportation. Homan then said he referred her to the DOJ for investigation to see if that would count as impeding. Here's Homan this week talking about it on Newsmax.
First of all, I think she's, I won't go after her on
Tom,
national
please
TV
do. Please do. Say what's on your mind. It's a holiday.
Look, she's the dumbest congresswoman ever elected to Congress, and she proves that every day. And look, bottom line is, I can't believe any member of Congress, Republican, Democrat, Independent, would want to educate criminal illegal aliens who are in the country illegally, been convicted of a violent crime, and have been ordered removed by an immigration judge after due process at great taxpayer expense. You got a congressman or congresswoman that does not want ICE to do the job that Congress has mandated them to do and funds them to do.
Naturally, AOC responded on X, writing, "This is why you fight these cowards. The moment you stand up to them, they crumble. Homan has nothing. The Fourth Amendment is clear, and I am well within my duties to educate people of their rights. He can threaten me with jail and call me names all he wants. He's got nothing else." CBP also announced that agents won't be using body cameras anymore. CBP's rationale was that since body cams can be tracked, agents can be put at risk. Critics, of course, fear that the lack of body cams can shield bad actors from accountability.
Responding to AOC, television host David Asman wrote on X, "Crumble, ICE and BP agents under Homan's guidance are taking child rapists and other violent criminals off the streets, while you're using intel to alert these scum and endanger law enforcement, one of whom was just killed in Vermont. Easy to spot the cowards in this scenario."
On the other hand, the Congressional Hispanic Caucus wrote, "To know your rights is a measure of good citizenship. Our members promote good citizenship because our constituents, citizens or not, demand it."
Yeah, and look, I actually, in this case, though I'm in the right of center position on the show, I don't have any certainly legal problem with AOC is within her rights to alert immigrants, illegal immigrants, to what their rights are. If you don't like her doing that, you can vote against her in the next election. She can face accountability for that to the people who elect her to Congress. Tom Homan should certainly not pursue any kind of legal action against her. It's free speech. She gets to do that. Also, immigrants have rights. Illegal immigrants have rights. We're a country of law and order and due process. We also don't know exactly who the illegal immigrants are in every case, so we need to afford full due process and legal rights as we seek to lawfully arrest and then lawfully detain and remove people who should not be here. But we can't just give the government total license to start rounding people up without respecting people's rights. That would not be very free speech and due process respecting. So I don't, I'm not. Don't put me in the. I don't want to be in the category of law enforcement people saying, "Oh, don't tell people about their rights. Don't do it." No, that's not. I'm not with that at all.
Well, from my left of center seat, I think you won't be surprised to hear that there's not a lot of daylight between us.
Yeah.
The thing that does jump out at me in this exchange, and I feel like increasingly in any exchange with AOC, is the name calling. So again, the word jumped out at me, but that my youngest calls the D word, dumb or dummy. I mean, she throws it around too, so we just say.
Do you allow that in your household?
We do not. That is why he calls it the D word.
Got to put a penny in the jar. Well, not anymore. We're getting rid of pennies. It'll be a nickel soon.
It'll be a nickel.
Yeah.
Of course, he's 6 years old. But at any rate, I agree with you. I mean, I do think that it is dangerous, however, to paint all undocumented immigrants with the same brush. And I do think that that tends to be part of the argument for folks who are really advocating for deportation. It is as if all undocumented immigrants are criminals somehow, which obviously we know is not the case. And in fact, they don't commit crimes at a higher rate than American citizens do.
And Tom Homan said previously that his goal and Donald Trump's goal is to begin with deportations for people convicted of other crimes, violent crimes. Certainly, we want more done to get those people off our streets and get them out of our country where appropriate. In terms of the body cam thing, so I have generally been a big proponent of law enforcement using body camera footage, and I actually think that can be to the benefit of police as well, because police are sometimes falsely accused of doing things wrong in interactions with citizens or non-citizens. It happens, and then they can acquit themselves if you have body camera footage. Now, I have never heard before this particular beef with body cameras that they can be tracked, and thus it might allow dangerous people to know where the border security are. I didn't know that, so I'm still kind of grappling with that. That might be a valid reason, I guess, in my view, to not then use body cameras, but it strikes me as potentially just an excuse to want to turn off the cameras.
You know
so
what
I don't
else
know
can
about
be
that.
tracked, Robby? Your cell phone.
Yeah.
The other thing can be tracked, your smartwatches. You know, there was that whole famous story about how members of our military were inadvertently showing the location of military bases because they were using smartwatches and tracking their runs. And so it was outlining things. I mean, we live in a society where a lot of the everyday tools that we use to live are actually trackable.
Yeah, we are all so trackable now. It'd be really hard to be a serial killer, I think, in the modern era, because there's so many cameras everywhere, and you have to have a phone, you have to have everything. You can't, like, this idea of people just like getting away with like crime sprees forever and never being caught is just like is unthinkable. Right? No, he appears immediately on 18,000 cameras, is tracked down and caught. You just can't have the obscurity or anonymity that you could have before the digital age.
We should have a whole discussion about the good, the bad, and the ugly about being tracked.
I made it sound like that was a bad thing. That's a good thing, that it's harder for serial killers to do their thing. That is definitely a positive. Don't mistake me there.
Truth.
More Rising coming up right after this. Democrats who are unhappy about what Elon Musk and DOGE are doing should perhaps keep in mind that cutting government waste, fraud, and abuse is popular. So popular, in fact, that previous Democratic leaders campaigned on ending waste, fraud, and abuse. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt posted a reminder of this on X as a warning to modern Democrats that perhaps they should listen to themselves. Let's watch.
Budget reform is not an option. It's a necessity.
The American people are entitled to transparency.
We can't sustain a system that bleeds billions of taxpayer dollars on programs that have outlived their usefulness or exist solely because of the power of politicians, lobbyists, or interest groups.
They're entitled to be able to figure out where their dollars are going, and they're entitled to accountability to make sure that we're using the dollars for what we said it was for.
We are going to go through our federal budget, as I promised during the campaign, page by page, line by line, eliminating those programs we don't need and insisting that those that we do need operate in a sensible, cost-effective way.
Mainstream media figures continue to clash with Republicans over what DOGE is doing. Let's watch CNN's fiery conversation with Representative Tim Burchett.
These are bloated programs. You have no-show employees that are angry that they're having to go back to work, that they've moved, and they're not.
No one's disagreeing. There's bloat and waste.
Jobs were.
No one's disagreeing.
Well,
with
then
that.
why are y'all not exposing it? Have y'all even talked about? Hey, Mozambique, we sent them $10 million for circumcisions. Okay. I mean, goodness gracious, ma'am, Americans are paying.
We've been covering at length
salaries.
Where the money is going to.
No, you haven't. All y'all do is run down Elon Musk and Donald Trump, and you continuously do this, and that's why your ratings are in the tank, ma'am.
All right, Congressman Tim Burchett, we're going to leave it there. I do appreciate your time coming on and having this conversation. Thank you very much.
Not to be left out, here is one tech titan's take.
Look, what I don't like about what's going on is I just view this as, well, let's watch the Democratic Party commit suicide. And like, I've been a Democrat most of my life. I kind of view myself as outside it, but I don't like watching the Democrats just commit suicide. And what I see is most of the country doesn't really, at this point, given the fraud, waste, and abuse we know is there, 90% of the country is like, get rid of that fraud, waste, and abuse. And I just view this as yet another example of the progressive left boxing themselves into a suicide dance.
The Democratic Party committing suicide over its objection to DOGE's efforts to identify and eliminate waste, fraud, and abuse. What are your thoughts, Linda?
Oh, well, first of all, I cannot help but be riveted by that map, that very detailed, data-driven map, which stands in sharp contrast, by the way, with what DOGE so far has put up itself. I mean, they had this whole wall of receipts thing, I'm sure you saw, Robby, where they misrepresented, is a very kind way of putting, how much they so-called cut from the various budgets that they are, in the middle of digging through right now. Most notably,
talk about that in a
most notably, they had this whole $8 billion line item that turned out to be far less than that $8 million, actually.
Billion?
Exactly. I mean, listen, I have personally been involved not once, not twice, but 3 times now in government websites that were designed to show exactly where taxpayer dollars are going. And I just think to myself, I cringe in thinking about what would have happened if we had made a similar mistake when we were putting all the information out there.
Well, look, I will say this. The things DOGE is doing, while I agree with and support them because I don't want to be spending money on a lot of this USAID stuff and various other things, we're not going to balance the budget or get our fiscal house in order by chipping away at these small things. If you really want to, and if the effort is a serious, try to get us out of debt, try to stop spending beyond our means, you'd have to touch defense and entitlements, which there's not much political will to do. Entitlements, at least, maybe defense. Now you'll have every general and every national security advisor screaming that we're making the world unsafe. If we do anything to defense, they'll be on mainstream media complaining about it. So that will be a problem there. But I think what DOGE is doing is still beneficial because just getting rid of excess government employees, getting rid of enforcers of regulations, getting rid of grants to nonprofits that end up fighting against Americans' free speech rights. These are all good, in my view, policy victories, but they're not going to be really about balancing the budget. They're going to be about ideologically changing the composition of the federal government in a way that is making it more responsive to the goals of MAGA in terms of policy, of having not over-regulating energy, not over-regulating speech, not interfering in other countries' governments, those kinds of things. Not having humanitarian aid with strings attached, all that stuff. That's policy. That's not really about getting rid of or balancing the budget.
Yeah, I mean, I think they are quite eyes wide open, to your point, Robby, about what they're actually doing. Whether they're saying that or not is a whole different story. I mean, this is part of the reason why Democrats are arguing and making the case that really those cuts to the federal government programs and budgets are really about extending tax cuts for the wealthiest individuals in America. So, I think they're pretty clear about what they're trying to accomplish, and I think some of those other programs that you pointed out have been under fire ideologically from this crew for quite a long time. So that's for sure true. I do think it's really, really interesting that what I think is hard is that it's not what they're doing so much, because you do hear Democrats saying all the time, as that video pointed out, that we need to be balancing the budget, that we need to make sure that there's, quote, no waste, fraud, or abuse. Mm-hmm. There's no line item called waste, fraud, or abuse, so of course it means there's going to be a lot of work to be done. I think it's not what they're doing, it's more how they're doing it.
It is always helpful to remember that political figures from the Democratic side, like Barack Obama, like Joe Biden, talked a good game about eliminating waste, fraud, and abuse as well. Of course, it never happened. Now, it never happened under Republican administrations either. I never, ever, ever for 1 second believed that any Republican president or Republican-controlled Congress was going to do a single thing to eliminate waste, fraud, abuse, ever. I am positively shocked in a pleasantly shocked sort of way about what Donald Trump and Elon Musk are seriously contemplating. With Tim Burchett, who has been a guest on Rising, and I appreciate that he's made his time available to us, certainly, it is the case that you can paint the media with too broad a brush. I criticize commentary, opinion-based commentary on CNN and MSNBC and CBS. I've been blasting CBS for the last 3 days based on their Sunday activities, their defense of German censorship. But these are large organizations that do some good reporting, and there has been some good mainstream reporting on fraud. There's a great Wall Street Journal piece a while ago on Medicare fraud. The Times, the Post, etc. They do frequently look into these things. When I'm criticizing these outlets, it's often more the ideological slant of their more opinionated people that I'm really questioning.
Yeah. Circling back to the point that you made earlier about where the big dollars actually are, though, I think one area for us to watch in the future is certainly going to be on the DOD front, right? It seems like there are some moves happening right now with DOGE, and to be fair, back when Barack Obama was president, he was the one who made the point that we spend more on our defense than the next 47 countries combined, and that would have been a great area to look for some cost-cutting measures.
Yes, and
we'll see what happens.
And Democrats have said they'd be willing to go along with Elon Musk if they look, or some at least have said that. Ro Khanna has said that. Bernie Sanders has said that. And there is
supportive.
Sure, there's an appetite to do it among MAGA's base. Nothing should be off the table, including defense. We should revisit whether the things we're spending on, are they actually contributing to our defense? Are they making us safer? Are they supporting our allies? Or is it, again, just more interference in exchange for nothing? So I really hope that is also scrutinized. And they don't even know what they're spending. The Pentagon has failed 6 or 7 audits in a row. Mm-hmm. So that is really an area where I hope DOGE takes a look next. Lots more to talk about today on Rising. Please stay with us. So DOGE has published what it calls its wall of receipts. It's a live list of government contracts it has canceled. It says, quote, "Let's balance the budget. DOGE's total estimated savings are $55 billion. That sounds like a lot of savings for 1 month.
On a closer look, almost half of the line item savings could be attributed to a single $8 billion contract. But if you look even closer, the federal database, it shows that the contract was actually for $8 million, not billion. This was revealed by the New York Times Upshot column by examining past versions of the contract on the federal procurement data system.
The DOGE website initially included a screenshot from the federal contracting database showing that the contract's value was $8 million, even as the DOGE site listed $8 billion in savings.
Here is a copy of the website. From last night, it still says $8 billion.
This morning, DOGE has updated its list to show $8 million in savings, though it did not acknowledge the error or explain how it might affect its calculation of total money saved, which remains unchanged. And I already did my Dr. Evil impression today, so I will not bring it out here. Now, in fairness, Elon Musk did say this at the press conference last week. Let's watch.
Well, first of all, some of the things that I say will be incorrect and should be corrected. So nobody's going to bat 1,000. I mean, we will make mistakes, but we'll act quickly to correct any mistakes.
This still begs the question about several questions about DOGE. It's bookkeeping and transparency. Don't you think, Robby?
Sure. I've made this mistake before. You hate to make the
million
how many
mistake?
zero? Well, decimal places, zeros. It's all. I'm not a math guy. It's tough out there. What can I say?
I mean, this is very problematic, right? I mean, we were having that discussion
earlier.
Well,
he's just saying how much money they thought they saved, and they were off, and they fixed it.
They were bragging about how much money they thought they saved.
I wish they had saved $8 billion. It was only $8 million.
Many factors.
Yeah.
I mean, even if you take a look at that $8 million contract, it's still overstating what they're saying they saved, right? Because some portion of it had already been paid out, I think somewhere around $2.5 million. So what we know to be true is that they are overstating their impact. They're doing it for optics reasons. And what this contributes to, in my opinion, is an erosion of faith in government, which we know has been happening for a very long time.
Fine, Linda. You've sold me. My hunger to eliminate government spending is not at all satisfied by these meager cuts.
You need more bees.
I want more cuts, as Kevin O'Leary said yesterday. I think we reacted to that clip, did we not? No, that was on a different show I did. Never mind. There was a great clip of Kevin O'Leary from Shark Tank on CNN recently. And they asked him, like, what do you think about these DOGE cuts? And he says, more. I want more DOGE cuts. Put me in that category.
Well, I think it's pretty clear that you sit in that particular seat, Robby. I mean, look, it's really the same point over and over again, which is I don't think the issue is about looking for places where we can be more efficient, looking for places where we can save money for the American people. It's what are we doing and how are we doing it? And importantly, who's doing it?
Yes.
Right?
Why is Congress doing nothing about it? A point I've made many times in recent days, that the kind of expertise and precision for growing or shrinking the government rests with a lot of legislators and their staff who seem to have no interest in acting in this unique moment, this small window MAGA has, conservatives have, Trump have, to wholly reshape the federal government. They have a mandate to do it. Donald Trump has huge approval ratings, the best approval ratings he's had since he appeared on
Yeah, but the best is still under 50%. Let's just
it's like
47%. He's still underwater.
I think it was 54 in the latest poll I saw.
That's a low bar.
he's more popular than he's ever been. You know, we're a very polarized nation. It's hard to be above 50 at all. He won the popular vote for the first time for a Republican president since George Bush's reelection. He has a moment to act, and Elon is doing a lot of things that could be, you know, identifying things, and then those things could be used by Congress to craft laws that reduce USAID's budget, or reduce the number of employees in the federal workforce, or restructure some of these agencies, make intelligence is only going to be on under this purview. Safety is going to be under this purview. You can act because you control Congress. And then if Democrats get in your way, if they stop you, if they filibuster things, then you can say, well, look, we're trying to, then you can point to Democrats as the obstacle to implementing the agenda the American people voted on. But if you don't even try, you don't give them the opportunity to even object to it, then I don't see why you would do that. So I hope Congress acts.
Well, I mean, I think what we're seeing right now is this incredible reshaping of where the Republican Party stands. I think the reason why members of Congress haven't taken action previously on USAID is because there was broad bipartisan support for the agency, including many prominent Republicans, right?
Marco Rubio.
The case is clearly true when it comes to the Department of Defense. And the thing I'm watching with members of Congress is how will they actually react when these cuts and the slashing of budgets and the slashing of programs actually impact their constituents in their home districts. I mean, the first shoe to drop, I think, is really going to be on the federal civilian workforce that's been cut, because as you know, 80% of them don't live in DC. They are in these people's districts. And so when they start to hear and feel the backlash, then I think that's when you'll see Congress act. There's that whole saying, when you feel the heat, you see the light.
Well, there is a danger, I guess, that causes them to not act or to not make these cuts that I want them to make. You're right that for a long time, elected Republican leaders' priorities were, I would say, very, very out of step with their own voters, their primary voters, who wanted massive cuts to government, who did not agree on foreign policy whatsoever with the completely bipartisan foreign policy approach. Yes, Marco Rubio 2 years ago wanted more spending, more funding for USAID. Now he's the Secretary of State.
For Ukraine.
And for Ukraine, but that's not Trump's policy. That's not the policy of MAGA, and so he has fallen in line.
Right.
I suspect many other Republicans will do so as well. Trump has won this battle. It is his party. His party is a party that is skeptical of foreign aid, of allies taking advantage of the U.S. in exchange for nothing on our part. He wants to move past the neoconservatism of the Bush years. There was a reluctance to do that among elected Republicans. But if you still want to do that, I'm sorry, the Democratic Party is the party for you. It's the party for the Cheney family. It's the party for Adam Kinzinger. It's the party for, you know, the Bulwark and the Dispatch, the Bill Kristol, the last remnants of neoconservatism. They belong in the Democratic Party, not the Republican Party. So these elected Republicans are going to find out that what their members, what their supporters, what their people want is what Trump says. In terms of foreign
I hear
policy.
absolutely what you're saying. I'm just not convinced that any of that is going to outweigh the continued rise in the price of groceries, the kinds of things that we've talked about before that are really hitting people's pocketbooks and are going to continue to do so, especially if the administration continues to move forward with things like tariffs, right? I mean, that's going to certainly raise prices for ordinary folks.
Yeah, we should not do tariffs. I think Donald Trump is wielding tariffs as a diplomatic and political tool, not trying to implement them as an affirmative good for our economy or for our industries, because they are not an affirmative good. I agree with you.
We've talked about it before. They ought to be used in a strategic way.
Yes, we should aspire not to have them at all, because they will make things more expensive, and we don't want to make things more expensive. That was the number one concern of voters. The number one reason Trump has been returned to the White House is because the price of everything was too high. And I do hope that him and Elon and other top decision makers keep that in mind and take that concern seriously, or yes, you're right, they will be out of power very swiftly if they don't listen to that. Up next, the president's take on Russia and Ukraine. We'll discuss. Stay with us. Die-hard Trump supporters are celebrating Trump's approach to negotiating the end of the Russia-Ukraine war. Meanwhile, President Donald Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy are taking shots at each other from across the world.
Here's Trump yesterday at Mar-a-Lago.
And I think I have the power to end this war. And I think it's going very well. But today I heard, oh, well, we weren't invited. Well, you've been there for 3 years. You should have ended it 3 years. You should have never started it. You could have made a deal. I could have made a deal for Ukraine that would have given them almost all of the land, everything, almost all of the land, and no people would have been killed, and no city would have been demolished, and not one dome would have been knocked down. But they chose not to do it that way. And President Biden, in all fairness, he doesn't have a clue. What he was so bad for this. He was so bad, so pathetic, so sad.
Zelenskyy, however, wasn't having it. In response to the Trump presidency's implication that the Ukraine started the war, Zelenskyy told reporters, "Unfortunately, President Trump, I have great respect for him as a leader of the nation that we have great respect for. The American people who have always supported us, unfortunately, lives in this disinformation space."
Now, Trump seems to be getting heat from the Washington foreign policy establishment. His supporters, however, are expressing relief. Here's former Arizona Senate candidate Kari Lake on political commentator Jack Posobiec's podcast yesterday.
I'm so excited to hear what's happening with the negotiations with Russia and then eventually with Ukraine to bring an end to this senseless war that should have never started. It's kind of like the grown-ups are back in the room again, and we're watching diplomacy happen at lightning fast speed, warp speed. And every day we're realizing things that we were told were not possible are indeed possible and are happening.
Posobiec also cheered Trump, calling his approach the art of the peace deal. Posobiec even accompanied Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth to Germany, Belgium, and Poland for his diplomatic security meetings. He's not a Trump administration or government official. Even right-wing world leaders are tipping their hat to Trump. Here's Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban earlier this month.
And war. You know, in Europe in the last 3 years, it was said always that war is good, peace is bad, concerning Ukraine-Russia war. So those who argued in favor of peace and peace negotiations and communication said, you are bad guys. The good guys are who are arguing in favor of war. So now it's totally changed. So Donald Trump, president, already changed the mindset of the whole Western world. That's where we are at this moment, and it's very good for Hungary.
Fox News' Brit Hume weighed in with a slightly different approach. He told the New York Times, "I don't think he's going to sell out Ukraine. I think these early talks in Saudi Arabia are just about the contours of the table in all likelihood, and you obviously can't make peace between two countries when you're only negotiating with one." Of course, there are others who feel differently about the situation. Former Republican Congressman Adam Kinzinger, for instance, wrote on Blue Sky, "Here's a better peace plan for Ukraine. Russia, you've already sustained twice as many casualties as the U.S. did in World War II. Leave Ukraine or suffer 4 times more and collapse as a country in the process. Done." Midas News editor-in-chief Ron Filipkowski wrote, "Trump is demanding slightly less from Ukraine than Hernan Cortez demanded from the Aztecs." And former U.S. ambassador to Russia, Michael McFaul, wrote on X, "Concessions secured for America, nothing. So far, all the U.S. has achieved is alienating our allies, pissing off the Ukrainians, and more generally, looking weak, really weak. Looking weak in Europe will have bad implications for our interests in Asia and worldwide."
Yeah, I'm pretty far apart from those commentators you just read what they had to say. Look, I think it was a profound mistake made by Joe Biden to have no relationship or no negotiation with Russia for 3 years, for almost his entire presidency, continuing to promise Zelenskyy the moon and then some, that we would defend them no matter what till the end of time. They had to have known that the public appetite in the U.S. to send money and weapons to their resistance would eventually sour, that's not something we could do forever, even as thousands and thousands and thousands of Russians and Ukrainians dying because of this. Look, I don't agree with the way President Trump characterized this as that Ukraine had the agency initially. That's not the case. Russia did invade Ukraine, so Russia had the agency, and that was a horrible thing that Vladimir Putin did. But as I often say, we have to live in reality. It happened, and the sooner we bring this war to an end, the better. We have to bring it to an end before Russia theoretically succeeds in conquering the entire country. And our own military advisor, so-called realistic thinker people, strategists like Michael McFaul and others will say that we're naive to negotiate with Putin or to trust or listen. Well, weren't you people naive to be telling the Ukrainian government that they could possibly win a war against Russia? Our military advisors, Zelenskyy's military advisors have known for a long time that this was a doomed effort. Other military advisors have known from the start that this was going to be a doomed effort. It's a giant country with tons of people that it's willing to use as cannon fodder in deeply immoral and unethical ways, I should say. But it was never going to result in Ukraine repelling Russia from the country unless the U.S. was going to send troops of its own or use its own weaponry, which was going to start World War III. So here we are. We need a deal to protect the rest of Ukraine. It will not be pleasant that Russia will have some of the Ukrainian territory it has achieved, but that's just the best deal we can possibly have. I have no idea whether it would happen if Trump had won re-election and stayed president. He says he would have stopped this war from happening. We'll never live in the counterfactual. We have no idea. But the reality is that Biden did not do anything to bring the war to a close, and now it falls to Trump to do so, and I have no problem with him meeting with Putin or having his team, Steve Witkoff, Marco Rubio, meet with Russian foreign ministers to bring this war to an end.
I think the filter for a lot, or the metric we should use for a lot of what we're seeing from this administration in just the past few weeks is how would we feel if it were us? I mean, there's that old saying, and Antony Blinken had used it when he was serving as Secretary of State, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And if you are Ukraine, you are feeling like you are not part of this conversation. It is your sovereign state. And we have to go back to the comment that President Trump made at the very beginning about they should have never started it in the first place. You can't discount that comment. It's like a poker tell about whose interests he's representing here. And certainly it is not Ukraine. I mean, part of what the ex post, the commentary that we read there at the end, part of what it was referring to is that what Donald Trump is demanding from Ukraine is basically the value of all of its critical mineral stores, half of its economic worth. I mean, these are things that there's no way any sovereign nation on earth would be willing to give up. And the idea that they would give up on their borders, their original borders, this is another thing. I mean, if I were Ukraine, I also wouldn't have a lot of confidence that the U.S. is negotiating on my behalf in good faith.
It's not an idea. It's just what's happened. I mean, how would one even propose to give back to Ukraine the territory that Russia conquered for it? Like, what? That's not something that can actually happen unless we join the fight on Ukraine's side, which is not something anyone in our government wants to do. It's not something the American people want. I don't believe the American people want to have World War III with Russia over Ukraine's borders. Do you?
I do not believe that the American people want to be sending our troops there, but I don't think that's the issue here. I think that what's happening is that Ukraine is not even part of this. And the U.S. is already making promises to Russia, just based on their own admissions, right, over the past couple of days here, that Ukraine hasn't agreed to. I think it's a matter of fairness, ultimately.
I mean, is it Ukraine or is it Zelenskyy, whose approval ratings I was just seeing on News Nation this morning are like 4%? This is a man who suspended elections, suspended opposition political parties, suspended opposition media in his own country, is ruling that country in a very illiberal way, admittedly in the midst of a crisis for Ukraine. I don't know, is it Zelenskyy's interest or Ukraine's interest? Do the Ukrainian people want to continue fighting? You see videos of them, older people outside the normal military range being conscripted to go fight and die in this conflict with Russia that could be brought to an immediate end. I see why maybe Zelenskyy wants to keep the conflict going to get more favorable terms, maybe for himself, for his administration, not necessarily for the country itself. I don't know that they want to fight on or have the ability to do so. And so then reality sets in, right?
So first of all, that 4% figure is what Donald Trump said during his press conference. That's actually not what the polling shows. The polling shows that Ukrainian people support Zelenskyy at 52%, which, by the way, is pretty close to how much the American public supports what we're doing in Ukraine. It's just over half. So there's definitely been some softening, right, in terms of support overall as the conflict continues, but it is certainly not how Donald Trump is describing it. And I think bigger picture, why is it for us to decide what happens to the Ukrainian people? Why is it for us to decide what they feel like is a fair deal? Well, and that's fundamentally it.
Well, fine. You're right. It's up to them. But we're arming them. We're giving them. We have a seat at the table because their entire defense of their country is due to the generosity of the American taxpayers. So I don't think if we're going to give money, we get something to say about it. If you want to say, if Zelenskyy wants to say, no, we are going to continue this fight with Russia to the last man, and to hell with you, and that's what we're doing. Yes, you're right that they have the right to do that. I think the result of that will be Russia conquering the entire country, which is not ideal from my standpoint. And honestly, is not even, I think, what Russia wants, because my understanding is that Putin wants a buffer zone between Russian territory and the NATO countries. So if they actually took all of Ukraine, then they would be on the borders of NATO, which they say they don't want. I'm not taking Putin at his word. I hear you there, but I do think even his own self-interest, what he wants is not to be up against a NATO country. But I mean, that's where we are. I think we should negotiate with. Yes, Zelenskyy should have a seat at the table, but he's had a seat at the table for years. It's Russia that had no access to the U.S., no conversation between our presidency and their leader. So I think it's a little bit of a rebalancing of that. But yeah, all three should come together to find a path toward peace that results in no more lost Ukrainian lives, no more lost Russian lives, and I would hope good relations between all three countries.
Yeah, I mean, I think for sure, it's just like with everything else. It's not what they're doing, it's how they're doing it, and I think that's something that we have to continue to take a look at. I also think it's really important that we don't whitewash what Russia has done and the brutality that has occurred there since 2022.
Up next, former FCC chairs are going after Trump's pick for the role, Brendan Carr. We'll discuss. Lots of beefs in the news cycle recently.
This time, former FCC chairs are blasting President Donald Trump's pick, Brendan Carr.
Carr, however, appears to be making fun of the whole thing.
Let's start with former President Barack Obama's FCC head, Tom Wheeler. He told Darcy he was hesitant to criticize a successor, but still did anyway. Wheeler took issue with Carr's investigation into Comcast for their DEI initiatives. He said, "The fact that they're saying that because you have a corporate philosophy of inclusion, I will launch an investigation that attacks the fact that your website states this is a core value of our business. Maybe that was my breaking point." Former President Bill Clinton's FCC chair, Reese Hunt, also weighed in, saying that the point of the FCC was to be independent and protect the First Amendment. He said, "So it's very important that all the commissioners remember this piece of originalism and they adhere to it, because if we lose the First Amendment, we've lost everything in this country." Lastly, former President George Bush's chair, Alfred Sykes, emphasized that the First Amendment should be foundational in both the Constitution and the way the FCC acts.
When Darcy reached out to Carr for a response, he wrote, "Lol, just 3. He then sent Darcy a super long statement, which reads in part, "I do feel bad for the 3 of them, though. I got to imagine it's hard when the curtain is closing on your career, and yet you're still yearning for one more moment in the limelight." Then Carr said he wasn't surprised that they disagree with the Trump administration's agenda. 2 of them were President Obama's and President Clinton's FCC chairs, and while I'm not a doctor, all 3 of them appear to have pretty bad cases of TDS. That's Trump derangement syndrome. Carr called all 3 of them partisans and said he would give everyone a fair shake at the FCC.
On top of Comcast, Carr is investigating PBS and NPR to see if they violated any rules by airing paid ads. Carr has also restored Trump's bias complaints against ABC, CBS, and NBC.
Well, look, Brendan Carr has described himself as a free speech warrior. He has objected to the bullying of private media companies by government. I like all that. I'm not sure why. Who's being investigated? PBS? Is that
PBS, NPR.
Yeah, I mean, those are media companies that get significant funding from the government. So there is some right for the public to have accountability there. I don't think the government should, as a general rule, be investigating private media companies, but I would also just cut off the funding to NPR and PBS, and then they can do whatever they want. Then they can DEI themselves until their heart's content. None of my business. Don't care. But as long as they're on the government grain dole, then it might be a valid exercise.
I'm sure you're not surprised to hear that I like PBS and I like NPR, and I think they provide
I like lots of things that I don't
service.
think the government needs to pay for.
Well, that's probably true, but they also do a lot of independent fundraising on their own. I'm sure you've heard.
Viewers like you.
Exactly, viewers like you. I mean, look, I think what's notable here is that you have a bipartisan group of past FCC chairs, whatever Carr said to the contrary, who are raising concerns. And I do think it's generally outside the norm. It's outside of, conventional protocol to go back after you've already been in office to point fingers and criticize people who've come after you. So I think that's worth calling out for sure.
I mean, if it's wrong look, I agree that it's wrong to go after or hound private individuals and private media companies. Of course, this has been standard Democratic policy. I've pointed out this example now several times in recent days on Rising, but Democratic lawmakers have hounded Comcast and Verizon and other cable providers, other platforms, YouTube, et cetera, for platforming conservative news channels, news content. They have sent intimidating letters threatening to investigate them for doing so. So this is very standard operating procedure. So it's a little, if the criticism is that, oh, how dare the FCC, treat companies like this? Well, this is exactly how progressive liberal governance works. I object to it, but it's just the same thing.
Yeah, I think it comes back to that whole discussion about the apparatus. And Democrats clearly feel like they are at a significant disadvantage when it comes to the conservative media infrastructure and apparatus. And I don't know all those members of Congress, but apparently they're lobbing their bombs in a very particular way.
I mean, Dems are losing the media ecosystem. We talked about that a little bit yesterday. It's just a very right-coded media environment all of a sudden. I don't think liberals have learned how to excel. They used to excel just fine, but they are really struggling to make political content, political news content, political opinion content that resonates with young people on the modes of communication that are now so much more common, like our show, YouTube,
very interesting.
and TikTok and those kinds of things, right-leaning content creators, right-leaning podcast. It's not always heavily political content, but it evinces a right of center or a pro-Trump ethos that has been really successful, and Democrats have not come up with any response to. Well, we keep hearing, we got to have our own Joe Rogan. Well, you had your own Joe Rogan. His name was Joe Rogan. He was a progressive Bernie Sanders supporter, and now him and so many other people who were successful in that environment have drifted to the right or far to the right in a very pro-Trump direction. It's fascinating.
I think that this is another area where Donald Trump should be given some credit. In the same way that he has reshaped the Republican Party, he's also reshaped the conservative media landscape, because it is about falling in line. And by the way, think what you will about him, but he makes for great entertainment. He makes for great content. So of course people are picking it up and running with it. I think that is fascinating. You don't have a similar dynamic on the left. I mean, I would say during Barack Obama's heyday, of course, Twitter came into being, and he was a very cool president. So you had people creating content that was related to him as an individual, and you just don't have that these days.
Up next, comedian Bill Maher has something to say about Trump's government slashing. We'll watch. Bill Maher is interesting, as you never know what he will support politically these days. In his latest rant on Real Time with Bill Maher, he actually disagreed with the way the Trump administration is handling the government. Let's watch.
This is week 4 of Hulk Smash. The administration that dissects a frog with a hand grenade. This is their method. Yeah, America's in shock that the guy whose catchphrase was "you're fired" is firing everybody in government. He wants to suck our blood. That is not what I voted for when I voted for Dracula. Maybe this is why Gen Z's approval rating of Trump has dropped 30 points in 1 month. Hey. Hey kids, a little tip. The time to pay attention is before the election. But yeah, I mean, they are... Look, I believe government is too bloated, but the way they're doing it is ridiculous and horrible, and
Now they went, maybe this is the one that's too far. They went and fired almost everybody in the agency that's responsible for maintaining our nuclear weapons. Fired. And then, of course, they had to walk that back because somebody said this is a national security crisis. Duh.
Losing the Bill Maher vote, I suppose.
Bill Maher does swing back and forth depending on what's going on. But we talked about this. This administration does make for good late night television.
Yeah, and I guess it, as we've said many times on this show today, I think it would behoove the Trump administration to do these things a little bit differently in some cases and do them through Congress. But you know, as Bill Maher alluded to, Trump made no secret of what he was going to do if he became president again, and he's delivering on his exact promises. It should not shock anyone that he wants to increase border enforcement, that he wants to engage with both our allies and our adversaries on the global level quite differently from Joe Biden, and that he is laser focused on purging the federal government of bureaucrats who worked to stymie his agenda last time around or worked against him in a personal, political, legal context. A vast reshaping of the federal bureaucracy is exactly what MAGA said they were going to do, and so no one should be surprised that this is what's happening. This is what they said they were going to do.
Yeah, and they also wrote it all out in Project 2025. I mean, no one should be surprised that they're now saying that they want to eliminate the Department of Education. Very clearly, there's a blueprint that has been out there.
Republicans have talked about doing that. I interviewed Betsy DeVos, the last Secretary of Education under Trump the first time, who also wanted to do that. They've wanted to do it. Ronald Reagan wanted to do it. They've wanted to do it since it was created. They've just never done it before. Now they might actually do it. That's the surprise, is that promises that were made are actually going to be delivered upon for the first time ever, first time in my lifetime. Republicans are acting to do. Trump is cajoling them into doing what he actually ran on. And so, yes, no one can say, oh, I didn't see this coming.
There are some warning signs, though, in what Bill Maher mentioned. Obviously, he mentioned Gen Z, and from a political operative
they're
perspective,
going to be winning so much. They're
going
to be sick of winning. It'll be fine.
It might not matter as much to the Republican Party, but the point he was making, even though it was cloaked in a joke, is that when people pay attention, they are troubled. And I do think, as we've talked about, as the impact of the various actions that are happening over the past several weeks and in the coming months, as they begin to reach people out in the real world, out in America, that there is going to be some backlash. It remains to be seen what that looks like and how that impacts members of Congress who may, of course, consider different actions in the future. And in particular, this administration is still, despite its recent actions to try to take away the independent portion of independent agencies, despite its very clear effort to expand the powers of the presidency in every way it can, I do think that Congress is going to be a real factor in this administration's success over the coming years.
I certainly hope so. That does it for us today on Rising. Thanks so much for tuning in, and be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we're now available anywhere you can find podcasts. See you back here tomorrow.